This episode of Literary Treks is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and to help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Welcome, everyone, to a special episode of Literary Treks. They're all special.
I was going to say, it's special.
They're all special because of my co-host. I'm Dan Gunther, and my co-host here, of course, is the wonderful Bruce Gibson.
Oh, well, thank you. That's so special of you to introduce me that way, and you're very special yourself.
Aw, thank you. We're all special.
We're like peanuts, like a Christmas special.
Huh. Yeah.
Where, you know, people feel sorry for us right now.
We'll have to end every episode with next time on a very special episode of Literary Treks.
You know, and
we can all learn a lesson or something.
I want to go watch Blossom right now.
Exactly. Whoa.
Joey.
Anyway, sorry about that. We are not here to talk about Blossom, but we are here to talk about Star Trek books, which is what we do every week. And hopefully you know that if you're tuning in and you're prepared. So some of you probably know that the latest Star Trek The Next Generation comic series has started coming out, and that is the Through the Mirror series. We're going to do something a little different. Instead of covering each issue as it comes out, we're going to kind of gather them all together for another special episode in a few weeks. So once all of those issues are out, we're going to cover all of them as a feature in an upcoming episode. So if you're looking for that, have no fear. We will be reviewing those soon. But today instead, we're going to be doing the feature How Much for Just the Planet, a special novel in a lot of Star Trek fans' hearts. It's a very polarizing novel. We'll get to that, though. So first of all, regarding the Through the Mirror comic series, Bruce, I know you've read the first couple issues already, I believe.
I've read the first one and a little bit of the second one. I was trying to decide if I want to read them all at once, but then I couldn't help myself because I wanted to be at least somewhat familiar with it to talk about it. And yeah, the art, there's different artists for each issue, but Scott and David Tipton write all 5 issues. But in the first issue, I will tell you, there's the main story, and then following that, there's a second story, a shorter secondary story. So be aware of that. So when you read it, you know you're getting 2 in that. I don't know about the other issues, but as you said, we'll discuss that on an upcoming episode of Literary Treks. And Amy Nelson is supposed to join us. If you hear that episode and Amy's not on, that means Amy didn't do her homework. And she's a teacher, and she should know better.
Well, she certainly doesn't have a history of that, does she?
No. Well, in her defense, too, she's going on a long vacation. So if something doesn't work out and she's then gone, so we might have to do it without her. So we're hoping that it all works out and she can join us.
Absolutely, yeah. It's always a lot of fun having Amy on, and this series looks to be really cool. I haven't looked at it myself yet, but it's a 5-issue series, and it's coming out weekly throughout May. So we'll get all 5 of those issues kind of bang, bang, bang right in a row, which will be really nice. So we'll be able to get that whole story and cover it in an upcoming episode. So
yeah,
look
actually,
forward to that.
This episode, as it drops, is the same week that the last issue comes out.
Oh, wow. That's going by fast. It's hard to believe. I remember how slowly the first issue or the first series came out, Mirror Broken, mostly because of the artwork issues with that, the huge amounts of time that it took to do the art in that. So this is different, like you said, different artists than that first miniseries. So
yes, and you will see similar art in this series at some point.
Excellent. Well, other than that, not much to cover in news, unfortunately, at the moment. So what do you say we jump straight over to the feature?
Yeah,
and
let's
talk about
how
much
what
this planet costs.
That's a question. How much is just for the planet? So, and did you mention we have an iTunes review? I don't remember if you said that or not.
I did not mention that.
Well, now we're saying that.
I forgot that.
So after the feature, we're going to read someone's iTunes review, and I hope it's good.
I hope so. No spoilers on that yet, though. Well, the novel we're discussing today, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is the TOS novel, How Much for Just the Planet? And this was one of the old numbered novels, novel number 36, written by John M. Ford. And you might remember he also wrote the novel about the Klingons, The Final Reflection, that we covered a few weeks ago. So this is a follow-up to that novel? Not really. I don't know. This is one of those novels that's really hard to classify. And off the top, I have to say it's a very polarizing novel. There are fans out there who absolutely love it. There's kind of this lore that's been built up around this novel. It has kind of this special place for a lot of Star Trek fans. And there are people who hate it because it is very different from your typical Star Trek novel. So to start out with, Bruce, is this your first time reading this, or have you read it before?
This I have read before. It's been quite a while. I don't remember exactly when I read it, but I would say it was probably at least 20 some years ago. I didn't read it when it first came out. It came out October of 87, but I would say I probably read it somewhere in the mid 90s. So I do have a paperback edition of it, and this is before they reprinted it and listed it as Worlds Apart Book 2. From Final Reflection as being Book 1. So it doesn't say that on here. So originally when it was published, it didn't have that Worlds Apart title associated with it.
Right.
But from what I look in the inside jacket here, it shows that I am holding a first printing of this novel. So I guess I got it I don't think I got it at a used bookstore, maybe, but either that it was sitting on the shelf at a Walden's Book for a long time.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I did not read this when it first came out. The month that it came out, I turned 5. So
oh wow, that's great. I turned 20.
That's excellent. Well, I did not read this at that time.
But your parents read it to you as a bedtime story, maybe?
I doubt that happened. I would have been so confused.
Like a lullaby in some of the songs that are in here.
Well, I have to admit, as an adult, first reading this, I first read it in 2012, and I was pretty confused then. So, I read this first in 2012 as an ebook. So, I've never had a printed copy of this, despite having seen it in libraries, bookstores, kind of all my life. But then when it got to the time that I kind of want to read that weird one that I read about online, I couldn't find it anywhere. So I had to buy the ebook.
Interesting. So let me ask you, you said when you've been seeing this around for all your life, why did you never pick it up?
I don't know. I think, I think I remember seeing it at like my junior high school library, and it might have just been a little bit too weird, and also probably too scared to be seen reading a Star Trek book, especially one with Kirk in a tuxedo on the front. Like, it just looks silly, and I kind of steered clear of it because it didn't look like something that would be up my alley. But after having read a lot about it and a lot of opinions about it, I was thinking, I really have to just pick up this book and see what the heck it's all about.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the same boat. That's why I asked you, because I didn't know if the cover was a turnoff. I remember going into, I'm remembering this now. I think I did buy it at Walden Books. I remember going to Walden Books, and I would go and pick different books. I wasn't going in order of the numbers. I was just randomly picking books, and I'd see this one, and I'd always was like, that just does not look interesting to me. It looks different, but I don't know if I want to go there. And I don't know what it was that changed my mind at some point to go ahead and buy it and read it. But eventually I think maybe I probably bought it and maybe didn't read it right away, I think, and eventually got to it. And then all these years later, now I'm rereading it, and it brought back memories.
Yeah. That cover, let's talk a little bit about the cover to start with. So we've got Kirk on one side and a Klingon on the other side. Now, obviously, the model they've used to draw the Klingon, I think, is Commander Krug, played by Christopher Lloyd from Star Trek 3.
Yep.
But presumably he's supposed to be this Captain Caden who's in this novel. That's my assumption anyway.
Yeah, that's my assumption too.
Yeah, and we've got this kind of stocky man, bald man in the middle, also with a tuxedo. I'm thinking that must be the character of Flighter from the novel, is my guess. Yeah,
I think you're right. So yeah, they're both Kirk and Flighter are in tuxes.
Mm-hmm. So, and of course, Kirk's kind of got a bit of a goofy expression on his face, and the Klingon's giving him side eye. Like, it's a really interesting composition, and if nothing else, it really sticks with you. So yeah, I don't know if I didn't read it because of the cover partially, which is too bad because it's very distinctive and I think fits this novel perfectly.
Well, because when you usually see a cover with Kirk on it, he's in his uniform. He's in a tuxedo. He's got a bow tie on. I mean, when's the last time you've seen Kirk with a bow tie on? Like, never.
Yeah,
so it's just a little odd. And then this other little, guy, kind of bald, and he's got his little fingers up like he's going to wait on you, like, table for two or something. I mean, it's just like, what is this? Is this a Star Trek novel? It just looks kind of funny on the cover. But, and then the title, How Much for Just the Planet? I mean, when you read the title too, it's like, what is this? I don't know if I want to read this or not. And that's what I was going through. I put it off for the longest time.
Mm-hmm. To the novel's credit, I have to say it doesn't pretend to be anything that it's not. Like, from the cover, from the title, immediately this is going to be goofy. It's going to be silly, and it doesn't try to trick you into thinking it's going to be anything other than what it is, which turns out to be kind of a musical comedy set in the Star Trek world, as crazy as that sounds.
That sounds crazy. Hey, which, reminds me real quick. I don't know if you remember this or ever heard this, and this is probably going back as far back as when I was reading this. I remember there was serious talk of a Star Trek opera.
Oh, yeah.
That they were going to actually perform, like, I don't know, in New York or something like that. And it never got off the ground, something, whatever. And I guess that would have been the true first Star Trek musical on stage in an opera form, which I would think would be really interesting, especially with Klingons. Because I would love to see a Klingon opera, which I think there's somebody's doing that somewhere in like Holland or Germany or something.
Oh, I'm sure.
I've heard about that recently, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they've got a Spider-Man musical, which, maybe that's not one to cite. It didn't do very well from what I've heard, but why not? Why not a Star Trek musical? That would be really cool. And like we said, we kind of get that in this book. It's a Star Trek musical comedy. The plot of this novel, I'll set it up for you. It's fairly basic. Basically, there's this planet that's discovered to have riches of dilithium, and the Klingons and the Federation, under the terms of the Organian Peace Treaty, have to compete for the right to develop it. And basically, hilarity ensues when the two crews kind of beam down to negotiate for the rights to mine this dilithium. And right from the get-go, basically the novel starts with a crew that's not the Enterprise. It's the, what was it? The USS Jefferson Randolph Smith, which is a prospector starship, basically. And it's named after a con artist, if you do a little bit of digging and research. So right from the get-go, if you're kind of, a curious sort of person that maybe already knows that, or looks at this name and says, they usually name starships after famous people if it's a person's name. I wonder who this is. And you look it up and it's, Jefferson Randolph Smith, alias Soapy Smith, this famous con artist and fraudster. So right away, you kind of know this is weird. Something's up here.
Yeah, the first chapter, right away. I mean, I would say within the first 2 pages, I think you're getting clued in that this isn't your typical Star Trek novel. Mm-hmm. And I won't say more outside of that because I'm going to comment on more of that piece later.
Right. Yeah. We'll kind of just do the broad strokes before we get into the spoilers, we've got this crew of this prospector ship. They discover the planet. They discover that it's rich in dilithium. And the Enterprise is assigned to go and negotiate. And of course, the Klingons have discovered it as well. And they're going and they're sending their team. And so they beam down to the planet. And like I said, right away, the Federation group under Kirk's command beams onto this stage that's decked out with Klingon symbols and welcome Klingons and all this kind of stuff. And, about 200 feet away, there's another stage that's decked out with Federation stuff. And that's where the Klingons beam down to. And it's, oh, whoops, we messed that up. Sorry about that. But it's clearly part of this plan because we don't know exactly what the plan is, but we see that these colonists or the civilization on this planet, they have a plan in the works here. And we see it kind of pieced together bit by bit.
Yeah, there's one thing I want to go back on that you were just saying about how, the Enterprise was assigned to go and, check out the planet for the dilithium and all that. One of the things that bothered me was they weren't that far from this planet originally, but yet they go all the way back to Earth to get the assignment to go back. Like, why did they have to go all the way back to Earth to say, what should we do? You should go back. Okay, here we go.
That did seem a little bit odd to me. And I actually reading it this second time, I was like, oh, I didn't remember they went back to Earth. I just thought they were there. But so, yeah, speaking of them going back to Earth, I want to make a little comment. Another thing that Ford does with this novel is, there's very broad comedy, but there's also very cutting, subtle comedy as well, too. Like, I love this admiral who gives them the assignment and just the bit of commentary on Starfleet and the Federation and stuff. The admiral, this is directly quoted out of the book. Now, and I know, the admiral said, that we have only the best interest of the... What are they again? Dirady, Spock said. Right, their interests. That's at the heart of the book. So, just a little bit of cutting kind of social commentary that, like, maybe the Federation and the Klingons aren't quite so different after all. The Federation's like, yeah, these people, they're very important. What are they called? Those guys. Yeah, they're very important. We've got their best interests at heart. Totally. Like, I love that. I love when the novels get a little bit subversive. It tickles me.
Yeah, it's very much of the, political, we really care about you people here, and where are we again? Who are these people? It's just, lip service, well, we care about everybody, but I don't know who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like we said, there's very broad comedy. There's physical gags, nonsense, and this is something that I've noticed a lot of people have a big problem with when they're reading this novel. They have issues with like these big gags and that sort of thing. I would submit that Star Trek has occasionally done this sort of thing before, especially in the original series. I would present The Trouble with Tribbles, I, Mud, and A Piece of the Action, for example, as as original series episodes that have at least touched on this before, but definitely it has never been completely embraced to the extent that this novel does. I don't know. Would you agree with that, or would you say this is a totally different situation?
I wouldn't say it's totally different, but I would say there's some difference to it. I did see some elements that reminded me of The Trouble with Tribbles, and certainly I mud in a piece of the action. I can see that too. It does have that comedy element, just like those episodes do. But I think this takes it a little further and is a little more slapstick.
Very slapstick.
So, but again, there's certain tones and certain elements that do remind me of those other episodes. So I can really go deep into this now if you want me to, and really.
Yeah, I'm going to say this is a tough one to talk about without getting into spoilers, because it's kind of one of those big reveals at the end of the novel that kind of makes the rest of the novel, I think, makes sense might be too strong.
Well, it's not even a reveal at the end. I mean, they're pretty much
that's true.
I don't even know hint, but they basically somewhat come out and tell you about maybe a third of the way in. But yeah,
that's true.
But you're right.
we'll give the official spoiler warning here, I think, because they get into it right away, basically.
Okay, so the comedy of this novel. So this is where, okay, now it's all coming out. I do have problems with this book. Okay. So I love comedy. Comedy's like my thing. I do improv. I've done stand up. So it's not that I don't have a sense of humor. Well, maybe I don't have a sense of humor, and that's why I'm funny, because I don't know what I'm talking about. But but here's the thing. This is where I have an issue with some of the comedy. I don't feel that some of it I laughed at, but some of the comedy didn't work for me because I didn't really relate to the character in the moment. I didn't find the humor of that moment within the characterization. And what I'm getting at is that I kept going back to thinking of the difference between The Voyage Home and The Final Frontier. We laugh at The Voyage Home, and a lot of people will say that's a funnier movie than The Final Frontier, because in The Final Frontier, the jokes seemed forced. They seemed to just, we got to be funny. We're forcing the jokes in there. Where in The Voyage Home, it's the situation. It's putting our characters in the situation that we laugh at. We see them struggle. We see them try to fit in. They seem out of place. And they don't fit in to that place. They are outside of that place. They don't fit into it. So that's what works in The Voyage Home, and that kind of humor I appreciate more and laugh at more. In this book, I felt that the characters, our crew, didn't feel like a fish out of water. They seemed so accepting of everything that was going on, as if it's just an everyday normal thing. It's like, towards the end of the book, we have a pie fight, and it's just, Kirk's like, okay, I'm going to pick up a pie and I'm going to throw it. And it's like, there was a lot of things in there where I really wanted to see the reaction of the characters about what's going on around them, as opposed to just accepting it and just going with it.
Yeah, I will say, if there's kind of one thing that I just had to turn off in my brain when reading this book, it was that a lot of these characters would just go along with it. And, Kirk will say, yeah, okay, I'll put on a tux and I'll pretend to fight off a mugger to save this person's relationship or whatever. It doesn't make sense. But it's one of those things that I just, maybe to the novel's detriment, I guess, I just had to kind of turn that part off and say, okay, I'm just going with it.
But then at the same time, but doesn't it, like you're saying, Kirk put on a tux, wouldn't it have been funnier to you in the same situation that Kirk is a little reluctant to put on a tux, but he decides to go ahead and do it because of what needs to be done, and then Spock sees him in the tux and makes a little snide comment, which makes Kirk feel a little more uncomfortable about being in the tux. It's like those character relationships. I found our crew to be the least interesting characters in this book.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. They're basically, and even literally in the story, they're props,
Right.
used by this planet to like arrange in a comedic manner. Um, that said, man, there were just parts that I was killing my. You mentioned the pie fight, the very end. I think it was the very end of the pie fight where Spock beams down, and I can read this with William Shatner as Kirk. Spock, Kirk said. Spock. Then, from the heart, Spock! He held out his arms. Somebody give the captain a pie! At least 12 pies intersected on Kirk. And I mean, that's the only line that tells you what happened there. And 12 people just threw a pie at Kirk in that moment. And I know it's ridiculous. And I know it's, very broad humor and like, it's totally, you would just shake your head if this was a televised show, I think. But I'm killing myself laughing at this and I can't help it. I don't know what I just can't help killing myself laughing at this.
Well, see, and for me, I mean, there was parts I did laugh. But like the pie fight didn't really make me laugh at all. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of an episode of the Brady Bunch where they all threw a pie at Cousin Oliver. They all ganged up on him at one point. But that's a whole nother thing. I really need to do.
That's for your Brady Bunch podcast.
Okay, little sidebar. I actually, a couple years ago, talked to someone about doing a Brady Bunch podcast because I love Brady Bunch. Okay.
I love it.
So I probably know Brady Bunch a little better than I know Star Trek, actually, because there's less to know.
Well, fair enough.
But anyway, again, it's like, and I saw somebody else's review online because I read some people say, someone referred to as the Three Stooges. And I see some of that in here. But at the same time, I mean, I'm not a big Three Stooges fan necessarily, but when I watch this, some of the funny parts to me isn't necessarily the pie going on someone's face. Again, it's what the situation is at the time and who is reacting to it and how and why, as opposed to just there's a pie fight going on. And as you're just saying, Captain Kirk's like, give me a pie. And it's like, okay, well, I see where this is going. They all give him a pie. Bing. Okay, like that doesn't work for me as much. It would have worked. I don't know, maybe it would have even been funnier to me if Spock got a pie. I don't know.
Part of it to me also, and I think this is why I would not have enjoyed this if I had read it as a kid, but knowing these characters so well, like I can just picture Spock's expression at that, just like where he doesn't really show emotion, but his eyes go just slightly wide and he kind of like looks around. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I know it's not spelled out in the book and maybe it would be better if it was, but something like that. Like I just imagine these characters in that situation, and as absurd as it is, I really get a kick out of that.
Right. And that's what you were like filling in the blanks, or you're putting in between the lines. And that's where I feel, in my opinion, the book would have been better if it would have, gave us what Spock's opinion was and his expression and what he was thinking at the time. And as opposed to just Spock beams down and he sees Captain Kirk get a pie and next scene, I was just like, so the characterizations felt off, it's again, it reminds me of the Final Frontier where there's certain gags and jokes that just don't really work because it seems forced, as opposed to The Voyage Home where you're laughing at our characters because of what they're struggling through in their situation.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense to me. For sure.
And I did, and don't get me wrong, I mean, there were parts I did find funny and I laughed a little here and there. It's just, I guess what I'm getting at is there was just so many times where something happened and I was just like, I was hoping a little more there, that fell flat. It's like, you're like, I almost felt like, you're delivering the punchline, but not great,
No, fair enough, for sure. This, I have to say, like when I first read it, as much as I knew it would be kind of silly and off the wall, I think I was totally expecting a follow-up to The Final Reflection. And I thought it would be like another story that delves deep into the Klingon psyche and all of this stuff. So I was really surprised reading this, even knowing that it was silly and absurd, that it just really had nothing to do with that. And it was really just this broad musical comedy that still involves the Klingons in an interesting way. And the one way I will say that I think it continues forward from the final reflection is it really, for lack of a better term, it's not the right term, but it humanizes the Klingons, which I'm sure they would really object to me using that term. But
not these Klingons.
Yeah, well, that's true. That we get very different Klingon characters, and one in particular, whose name I can't remember, but he kind of is partnered up with Uhura for much of the book.
Yeah, it's Proke.
And Proke, right. And he's a big, I would call him a cinephile almost. Like he really likes movies and old Earth stuff like that.
Yeah, it's when their ship contacted the Enterprise, his greeting message was a quote from Orson Welles.
Right. And so, of course, that leaves the Enterprise crew incredibly confused, and the captain saying, like, okay, Proke, so why should I not assassinate you right now? Like, what the heck was that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the Klingons for a second, because,
okay.
I mean, so, we usually like lay some things out here of what we want to talk about. We're jumping all over the board right now. So
we've thrown the script out the window. We do not have a good stage manager like the Dirady do.
No,
we're just,
but we sure know what he looks like, because if you look at the cover, there he is. But so the final reflection, I mean, and we reviewed that in episode of Literary Treks. It was number 216, I think. I don't know. I made a note about it earlier, but anyway, now I can't find it. But anyway, we'll find that out. But anyway, so what I had a problem with is with the final reflection, we really delve deep into the Klingon culture. And even though a lot of it's not, quote, canon now, it was just very interesting. It was a very interesting take on how the Klingons were and their culture and how it related to the Federation and how they perceived the Federation. And in a lot of ways, how there was a lot of parallels between the two. And then we get to this one, and it's the same author, and it's, like you said, I mean, it's just a slapstick comedy throughout. And I'm like you. I mean, I read this years ago, but I didn't remember all the detail. But after reading the final reflection, which was my first time reading it, I thought going into this, it's like, okay, we're going to get a little, I know this is supposed to be a comedy, but we're going to get more of that Klingon. We're going to find some more things out, and we really don't.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it doesn't really expand a lot on what was given there. I do like that he carries those same Klingons forward. Like, we don't learn a lot more about them, but we still see kind of that brand of Klingons, if that makes sense. And I do like the characters. And the one thing I have to say is I like that we get into the motivations of them. So Captain Caden, for example, who's the commander of the Klingons, he's a pretty reasonable guy, and he goes along with a lot of what's going on. But when certain things happen, he interprets them through a Klingon lens, and, okay, well, I got to go kill Kirk now.
Right.
So, some of that I really appreciate. And I don't know, any novel that involves a Klingon captain getting his foot stuck in a toilet. I'm sorry. I love this book. Oh, man. Okay. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry.
So
I don't even know. Like, how did this novel get written? I'm so glad that it did.
All I can say is, have you noticed they haven't tried to do another one?
No, this is true.
Yeah. I wasn't. Yeah, I'm not bothered. Okay, so we're coming from different ends of this, because you're saying I love it. I'm not saying I hate it at all. But I mean, yeah, it doesn't bother me the Klingon foot going into the toilet. I mean, there's parts of it that I thought were funny and worked. It was just, oh man, there's just so parts of it that I just thought it could have been so much better. Just like it was too easy at times. The two crews, the Klingon crew and the Enterprise crew, they got along too easily at the like throughout the book until, like you're saying later, the captain's like, oh, well, I need to be a Klingon and want to kill Kirk now. But, before it's like, they beam down and they're, Kirk and Captain Caden are hanging out, in the hotel bar having drinks and just like old chummy buddies, and just like, there's no tension between the two, really. There's not, this is awkward sitting here drinking with a Klingon. I mean, they got along better than they did at the end of the final Frontier movie, where they all were having drinks at the end on the Enterprise. I mean,
she has wonderful muscles.
I was just going to do that.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm glad you did it. I was thinking the same thing, but it was almost like that. I don't know. Anyway. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Toilets.
So fair enough.
I mean, we don't see toilets on Star Trek. Now we do.
That's true. No, and fair enough. I would be lying if I said there weren't times where I'm reading this and I just roll my eyes and go, oh God. Like, there is some stuff that is just ridiculous. And yeah, like there is a certain amount of manipulation to get characters into particular places that don't make a lot of sense. I'll totally cop to that. But yeah, no, I'd be lying if I said I didn't love this novel. The one thing that I wanted to talk a bit about is kind of the artistic flourishes, for lack of a better term, that John M. Ford put in this novel. The one that jumped out to me that just I really loved was, at one point, Scotty and a Klingon almost come to blows. So they have to have a fight, and Scotty is to pick the weapon, and he picks golf clubs. And by that, I don't mean they're going to beat each other about the head with golf clubs, but they're actually going to go and play 18 because Scotty is a true Scotsman and plays golf.
Do you hear this, people? Dan likes pie fights, Klingons playing golf, and Klingons getting their foots in toilets.
And Chekhov showing up in like knee-high socks and baggy, puffy short pants tucked into them and a vest and a little golfer's hat to caddy for Scotty. I mean, how can you not love that? That's so great. Like, that's second only to his little Dutch boy costume in Star Trek 3. Like, it's great stuff. Oh, well, we're going to get so many letters and emails and that's saying, how could Dan like this? This is ridiculous.
No. You may be getting some that say, they love it with you and they can't stand what I'm saying. But, there's parts of those scenes that I like too. I mean, it is funny to think, Scotty chooses golf and a Klingon. Again, I mean, these aren't the Klingons we're used to, TNG post all that, this is, again, we mentioned the novel was written in 1987. And so this is more based on the original series. Klingons are a little more human-like. So, you kind of give a pass to that. They're not really going with the Klingons from the motion picture and The Search for Spock at this point, even though they put basically Krug on the cover. So anyway, but yeah, the golf thing's okay, especially when they're being attacked and they're using their clubs as their weapons and like swords and things. I mean, yeah, that I actually did laugh at.
Yeah, and I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's ridiculous also that the Klingon would be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll play golf. Sure.
Right, exactly. Don't you want to see the Klingon not want to do that and feel a little uncomfortable about it? And totally. Scotty's trying to convince the Klingon how to swing the club like this, as opposed to they just go out as if they've done this a million times before. The Klingons play golf all the time. There's the Klingon Country Club,
Well, you've never experienced golf until you've played it in the original Klingon or something, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, like for instance, one time they're out on the golf course and there's this mountain peak that Scotty's gazing at, and it's ringed with stars. And he comments that, doesn't there seem to be a higher power controlling our destinies? And I mean, the mountain peak with the stars around, it's the Paramount Pictures logo, which is, again, I I don't know. I don't think there's anything necessarily subversive that he's trying to say here, but it just almost feels like a little dig at Paramount. Like they're controlling of the Star Trek brand or something like that. I don't know. That was one that just leapt off the page. I absolutely loved that. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about a bit was the cast of the novel. There are a ton of other science fiction authors and some of them Star Trek authors that are cast in this book as various characters. So we're introduced to Princess Dee the First is this character's name. And that's actually Diane Duane. And then her kind of paramour, Pete Blackwood, is played by Diane Duane's husband, Peter Morwood, who has also written Star Trek novels with Diane Duane and stuff. And then this one, I didn't realize when I first read it, but I looked this up this time. Neil Gaiman shows up as Leon the Magian at one point in the novel, which I was a big surprise. I wasn't expecting that one.
Yeah, I didn't either. I know where you got these off Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Because I didn't know these too. I saw it there too.
I'm actually reading American Gods at the moment, which is funny. So I was like, oh, Neil Gaiman, that's cool. And we've got Pamela Dean as Pam. We've got Janet Kagan as Janika. And then A.C. Crispin, Anne Crispin. There was Lieutenant Anne Crispin in the novel, which was based on her. And then the stage manager who shows up from time to time when people crash through the sets or whatever. And he says, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be over there, and moves them to where they need to be. That's actually John M. Ford. And he describes himself, you know, as he looks as the stage manager trying to orchestrate this whole thing.
You know, and when you say stage manager, I mean, he is the stage manager of this whole book. You know, he's kind of taking charge of things. And a lot of times when I was reading this book, I kept thinking how this felt like like it could be a TNG or Voyager book that's taking place on a holodeck, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
And it's almost like, you know, this is his Ford's holodeck Star Trek adventure, you know?
Well, there's like one point when I think somebody's hand brushes up against the brickwork at the back, and he's like, oh, this is painted bricks. And I'm like, I think I know that set from Star Trek, because there's those bricks that show up in the background of every time they're in like some castle or something.
Right.
And they're obviously just painted bricks. And I think this is the Star Trek crew discovering they're just on a set, but like in just a normal episode or something like that. And someone even mentions like styrofoam rocks bouncing around at one point.
Yes.
So I'm like, this is just, you know, them piercing the fourth wall and discovering the, I don't know, background of the 1960s Star Trek TV show. I don't know.
I just love looking at Dan's face right now. He's just beaming.
It's kind of one of those things that like, if I hadn't, I would probably really dislike this novel if I was trying to take it seriously as a Star Trek story. But I don't know if maybe in my mind I'm picturing it more as just somebody having fun with Star Trek characters rather than it being something that actually happened. I don't know if that maybe is playing a part in it, but yeah, I totally understand why people would dislike this book.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, it's not your typical Star Trek novel or Star Trek story. I think maybe I read this in your review online, Dan, but or someone mentioned it somewhere that, you know, Monty Python. I mean, it's very much like a Monty Python type Star Trek story. So if you go into it and think, oh, this is Monty Python's Flying Star Trek Circus, then you know, maybe you'll approach it going in a little different than expecting what you get at a regular Star Trek book. When we get later into the book, prior to the pie fight, you know, going back to the whole Princess Dee and Peter Blackwood. So they separately approach different crew members and part of the Klingon crew because they're kind of setting up this stage show that's going on the planet, but our crews don't know this. But Dee is a princess who is being forced to marry, or no, wants to marry Peter Blackwood, but her royal family doesn't want it or whatever, and she wants it to make him look like a hero. So if, the ambassador is Charlotte Sanchez is the ambassador that they brought back from Earth for this mission, she convinces her and this other Klingon officer to help her stage something so it looks as if her Peter Blackwood had saved her or something, and make him look like a hero. And at the same time, he's approaching Captain Caden and Captain Kirk to ask doing a similar thing. And as it's playing out, they're all kind of stepping on each other's toes, not knowing what the other's doing. They don't know that they know, and they know whatever. And I thought, oh my gosh, I feel like I am reading Star Trek meets the 60s Batman series meets Three's Company.
Oh my God, totally.
And then make it into a musical, and there you go. This is your book.
Totally. Now, if I'd read that like as an idea I'd be no, don't do that. But I don't know. I think it works. Like, I really enjoy this. And like I mentioned earlier, it's not even just for the really broad comedy stuff. Like John Ford is a talented enough writer that he just crafts these little bits with his words that I just feel resonate really well. There's the one quote, I think it's right near the end, where, Flighter has revealed everything that's happened. He's like, it was plan C. It was comedy. We wanted to set you guys at ease and make you, not want to whatever their end goal was. It was just kind of to put them off balance and stuff. Kirk said, you can't run a society based on comedy routines. You can't, Flighter said, almost innocently. I thought it was rather a common thing. Not under that name, of course. I love these little digs, these little subversive, I don't know.
No, I'm with you on that. I agree. I like that.
Yeah. Another little bit, like, it's totally silly and it's totally obvious, but even when they're not dealing with this planet, there's just some great comedy stuff going on where, Kirk is told that, Ambassador Sanchez, Charlotte Sanchez, will be the ambassador, blah, blah, blah. And McCoy's like, oh, do you know her, Jim? And he's like, no, I don't know her. He's like, oh, that's a first. I don't know how many times we, run into some woman who's an old flame or, you just know from dating her once or whatever. And he's like, yeah, I guess it does happen a lot, but not in this case. And they come around the corner and he's like, oh, Charlotte Sanchez. Oh, right. She's like, oh, yeah, you bought me that ice cream soda once. Right. This is Bones. This is Spock. This is Charlotte. Yeah. It's just, I love
and
that
right
stuff.
Before that, McCoy was making a comment how it seems like every other mission, there's some woman who boards the Enterprise that Kirk has had a relationship with, and now they run into one.
Charlotte, Caliente Sanchez. I'd like you to meet my Spock officer, Commander First, and Dr. McNeil. I mean McCoy. I love it. It's so stupid. It's so stupid, but I love it.
So, okay. Oh my gosh. So one thing I want to mention is I mentioned earlier in the show about the first 2 pages. So I started to have problems with this novel at the very, very beginning because they are in the mess hall, our Enterprise crew's in the mess hall, and they're getting their food from the replicators or whatever. And Kirk's orange juice is a luminous electric blue orange juice. It's blue. It's electric. Mm-hmm. It's electric blue. And he's sitting there with his orange juice with Scotty, McCoy, and Spock. And he doesn't mention a word about it. He just looks at it. Oh, it's blue. And he drinks it. And it tastes like orange juice. It's just interesting that it turned out to be this electric blue. And I'm thinking, that's where I was like, wait, what? That doesn't sound like Kirk. Kirk would look at his orange juice blue, and there's his chief engineer right there next to her and say, Scotty, why is my orange juice blue? There's something wrong. I have to fix it. But he just drank it. And I'm like, who in their right mind is going to drink orange juice that's blue? And I just was like, I didn't think that was funny. I just was like, and then we get to the other ships, the Klingon ship and the other Federation ship, and they have problems, and they're all just like eating the batter toast on the Klingon ship, even though it's a strange, like no one's fazed by this. And then the crew of the Jefferson, Randolph, Smith, their computer is going bonkers and acting real weird and silly. To the point that
it got peppermint milkshake spilled.
It got peppermint milkshake because it's got peppermint. And the captain asks her Vulcan science officer about it, and she's just like, "Oh, well, it was programmed by humans. There's nothing wrong with it," and then leaves. I'm like, it just was like none of that to me was really funny. It was just like I don't like these characters aren't like. They're just accepting everything. That's the problem I have with the novel, with the comedies. Everything is accepted, and it's just like, I want Kirk to question why his orange juice is blue. And there's that can be a funny scene right there. But just to have Kirk look at his orange juice, notice it's blue and drink it and think it's fine and not say a word to anybody is not really that funny to me. To me, there's so many missed opportunities at a comedic level, for me, in my sense of humor in comedy, that were missed. Like this read to me like a first draft, and then go back and fill in all those elements in there, and then I think you've got a stellar comedy Star Trek novel.
I do have to admit, I have no idea what the point of the blue orange juice was. Like, it comes up again a few times in the book. Was that ever paid off? And that
somewhere?
Was I can't.
That's the other thing. Like, why were the computers acting up on all these ships? There was no relationship between these ships. They were all in different parts. They hadn't even met each other and all this stuff. And all their computers are acting up and acting weird. And there's no payoff. There's nothing that explains why that stuff was happening. Like, I kept reading the book, waiting to find out what caused this. There's maybe something to do with this planet or the dilithium crystals or something. And nothing. Like, I don't even understand why that was even in there.
I did really appreciate the Chekhov's gun of the giant inflatable starship, though, and the way it showed up at the end. I thought that was great. Yeah. But it's a giant. Okay, so it packages down to something very small, but you open it and it inflates to this huge starship, and it's a deployable target drone, I guess they called it, or something like that. And there was one that was a Constitution class ship and one that was a Klingon target drone or something like that. But and it shows up in an amusing way at the end.
And this is more at the beginning, but when the starship, the Jefferson, Randolph, Smith, the computer is now running the ship because the crew jettisoned through a escape pod to the planet. The computer goes to dock the ship into the inflatable Enterprise, basically, and pops it, and the Klingons wonder where the ship went. Like, it's just but which was weird. Again, this is where it's like things like fell like missing to me, because that happened and the scene ended and the Enterprise is there because they were seeing two starships, and so the one starship disappears because we know it deflated, and the Klingons are like, what happened to the other starship? And then we jump ahead to a next scene, and the Enterprise is on Earth asking what they should do for their next mission, and the Klingons are going to the planet. And I'm like, well, wait, one ship disappeared. Why did the Enterprise and this Klingon ship, who were right there each other, that saw this happen, just, I guess they left each other, never talked? Like, I don't understand what happened after that.
Yeah, that part, like I said, I didn't remember that they popped back to Earth when I was reading this, and was like, that's weird. Like, I don't really understand that. But yeah. The more you talk about this, the more like, no, I don't get that either, but I still love it. I don't know. I'm not doing a very good job of justifying.
No, I think you are. I mean, I think, in my opinion, there's certain elements of the humor that works, and then there's other elements for me that's too slapstick, that things just fall short, and the characters aren't quite reacting the way I think they should be or would be in these situations, and I would have liked to have had that. And then there's situations that are just in here that don't really even are resolved. I guess or completed. Like everything, there's just things that just feel like it just falls short, like there's missing pieces in it. That's where I'm struggling with it. However, I will say, as I tweeted out that I'm reading this book, I've had a few people comment on my tweets and say, "Oh, I could never finish that. I could never get through that book. I never finished that book." I had a few people say that to me. And I did not have a problem reading the book. There was never a point where I was just like, I cannot get through this. It wasn't like it was that bad. It was just, I mean, I was enjoying it. I was going through it. I was actually enjoying it. There was just things about it that were falling flat for me.
Yeah, no, and fair enough. So we've mentioned the Jefferson Randolph Smith a couple times. And so it's basically got a 3-person crew. Captain Trofimov, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. The first officer, whose name is Tellyhu, and he's a Withiki, which is like a winged bird-like creature, I guess. And science officer Tavau, who's a Vulcan. So I see you've got in the notes here some things about these characters, as well as 2 teenage Dirady kids, basically, Orvie and Thed, who play a role in the story as well. What did you think these characters bring to the story?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Actually, well, first of all, these crew members that went in the escape pod, they land on the planet and they run into these 2 teenage civilians that, which actually, I actually enjoyed these characters, to be honest with you. When this crew gets out of the ship and they're trying to figure out where to go, where to walk to, the teenage kids are like, "Oh my gosh, these are aliens. Oh, they're kind of invading our world. What should we do?" And the crew is very friendly and saying, "Hey, could you help us out and tell us how to get to town?" And they go, "Yeah, go that way." And they point them in the opposite direction to make sure they're going the right way. And throughout the book, we see these 3 crew people going through situations where they just can't seem to get to where they need to go, and they're running into people who are just like not really helpful or they're afraid of, and it's just, so there was comedic elements to that I actually liked. But what I was confused with, and maybe you can help answer this for me, Dan, they finally get to a point where they find, what was it? They got into a ship or something that got beamed to the Enterprise. Oh no, they found Kirk's communicator or something. And they don't say who they are. They just say, "Enterprise, beam us up." And they beam up and they hide throughout the ship and find their ship docked in the shuttle bay and hide in there. And I kept thinking, why? They're Federation officers. Why are they hiding from, they've just been basically rescued. That they rescued themselves by being the Enterprise, but then they're hiding. Like, I didn't understand why they were hiding.
The only thing I could think of was like they'd basically gone like 3 days or something without food or whatever, and they like found the mess hall. I think they were delirious. Like I don't know. They're crazy to begin with. Spock obviously has some sort of connection with Tavau, and like,
but that wasn't explored then, was it?
It comes up just a few times, like Spock kind of, "Does this incident perchance involve a peppermint milkshake?" "Why'd you say that, Spock?" No reason. Like he just kind of, so this character of Tavau really fascinated me because she's a Vulcan who's very messy, apparently. Like that's her big, like, defining characteristic.
With milkshakes.
And she apparently at some point spilled this, Vulcan version of peppermint milkshake onto the computer, which, by the way, Vulcans, vegetarians, milkshakes, milk product. I don't know if we want to explore
it's
that
soy
too
milk.
much. Maybe it's soy milk. Yeah, okay.
Or almond milk.
Or almond milk.
Or Nesquik.
That could be, yeah. But she apparently spilled it on the computer on the Jefferson Randolph Smith, and that's why their computer is all buggy. Although she would never admit it, because every time the captain asks her about it, she's like, no, it was fine. I had nothing to do with it.
But the computer, was calling her out on it. And when the Enterprise scanned the ship, Spock identified that milkshake was in the console. I was like, that's powerful scanning equipment right there. Because he
really
identified
good
the flavor and everything.
Yeah, that was impressive. And then, of course, once they're in the escape pod, I guess she's got another milkshake with her or something, and they get tossed about
What
in
was
it.
it? No, the computer shot
that's right.
the milkshake onto them because they got in and the captain said something like, the computer says, "Is there anything else you need?" And she said something like, "Yeah, I need a hard drink," or something like that. And then it starts spewing out milkshake, like, because it's thick and hard enough. I don't know. It was just weird stuff like that.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. But I don't know. I just loved this character, and I don't know if it was embarrassment that Spock showed that he knew this woman or something. I don't know. It was ridiculous. But again, just these little weird bits that I love. I don't know.
Yeah, and I like Orvie and Thed, the two teenagers. I thought there was good interplay between the two of them. And I don't even remember how things ended with them. Didn't they get to the Enterprise too? They went to the Enterprise.
Yeah. So they found the escape pod and got into it and were beamed up in the escape pod.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then.
Yeah, because they were like, oh yeah, they were in the escape pod. And it's like, we can't stay in here to get taken up to the ship. The door's open. We won't breathe, but it gets beamed up. So they're like, oh, okay. And, yeah, they encounter the three characters from the Jefferson Randolph Smith, and they both basically con each other, they think, or something, it's basically, it's absurd humor that I don't think really is supposed to pay off big time, other than to showcase silly situations and wrap everything up eventually. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, and we talked earlier before the show on the other side of the page about the music in here, because this is a musical.
Yeah, that's one thing that I know there exists online, and I kind of wish I'd done a little bit more research about that, about the various songs that show up in the story. And they're all set to the tunes of known songs. And I have looked them up before, and some of them are songs that I just don't know myself. I don't have a big musical theater background, so I don't know a lot of those, but there are a few that are very obvious. There's one that's set to the tune of Rawhide, which I think most people know. I can't think of how it goes right now off the top of my head.
Rawhide. I can't think either. Wait, we need to find it in the book, and then we can sing
There's that video that Patrick Stewart sings Rawhide and a bunch of other country music hits.
Oh, does he?
We need to look that up.
So I'm looking in here right now. I don't know, but like we were saying, there's nothing in this. This is on the other side of the page we were talking about. There's nothing in the book that tells you what these songs are based on, that what's the melody, this is a play on this song or whatever. It would have been great, I think, in this book if there was a footnote that said to the tune of. That way when you got to it, you could in your head sing it along as you're reading the lyrics, because I would say all but that one was the one. I didn't know what tunes that these were to, but back then, when this book first came out, you didn't have the internet that you could just go and randomly, let me go look for this song. And by the way, I found it, it's rollin', 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 keep your camel going, let the non-coms know if you're tired. Anyway, that's in the book. But I think we knew what that tune was because of the rollin', rollin', rollin',
Right. Yeah, you just, as soon as you read that, your brain kicks in if you're know the song at all. Now, I know like various conventions over the years, apparently, or at least one convention they've had people put together and put on shows with these songs.
Heard that. I mean, I haven't seen it, but I've heard of that. Yes, that they've done that.
I would so love to see that. I don't know if I'm assuming that's probably something that hasn't happened for a while. I'm assuming that was probably quite a few years ago, would be my
Dan,
guess.
You know what? You and I are going to Star Trek Las Vegas this year together. So, this is our opportunity to revive this and do a performance there.
Do you think, you for sure, but in my case, do you think maybe they would rather somebody who could sing?
No. It's funnier if we can't sing.
All right. Well, if you're at Star Trek Las Vegas and you happen to see me or Bruce, come up to us, and we will not sing any of these songs because we don't know them. We're ill-equipped.
Rollin'.
We could do that one. If I have my ebook with me, I'll pull it up and we can do that. But yeah.
I know somebody I bet we can convince, Scott Mance, who does like a lot of the hosting and emceeing from Access Hollywood. We'll get him to do it.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So, listeners out there, we want to hear from you about this book. Especially if you have seen one of these performances at a Star Trek convention, we would love to hear about what that was like. So I'm putting the call out for that because I want to know what that's like. But I guess kind of wrapping up here, Bruce, what are your kind of final thoughts about How Much for Just the Planet and maybe a final rating? And I want to be the first one to ask because I gotta somehow justify the rating I'm going to give it.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to give it a really great rating, but that doesn't mean that it's not a decent book. I think it really depends on your sense of humor or how you come into the book and approach it. And again, I mean, some of the humor worked for me and some of it didn't. And there were certain things I just felt, like it wasn't satisfying me enough. Like it didn't complete certain scenes or explain some things better. And I really wanted, if anything, just the characters' reactions to be more of what I would expect, how they would react in these situations. And no, we never see really our crew break out into song on their own. So, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I think it's what you said at the beginning of the show is there's some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I did not have a problem reading through it. It was not like there's been a few rare times in Star Trek novels where I really was struggling getting through it. I did not struggle through this. It was an easy read. It was fun read. But outside of that, I would say that I would give it maybe, a couple of pies out of a half dozen to throw at Dan's face.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, no, it's kind of, for me, in the age of, television shows that have that weird random musical episode that shows up, right? I mean, Buffy the Vampire Slayer did a musical. I've never really watched that show, but I've heard it's great and that episode is great. I've recently been watching The Flash and I watched their musical episode, which was ridiculous, but they figured out a way to do it. There's kind of some weird justification for doing a musical episode. And I feel like this is kind of Star Trek's musical episode. And very early on, they beam down and at some point the natives start into song about something. And Kirk says, if this is a planet whose culture randomly breaks into song at the drop of a hat, I guess we have to go with it. And, it's kind of, that's almost to me the author telling the reader, just go with it.
And I did like that line. I'm glad you mentioned that because it does explain why they don't react the way I think they should.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's a ridiculous explanation though. Like, I'll be honest. And it's hand wavy and it's like, just relax, just go with it. But over the course of this book, both times I've read it, I did just relax and I just went with it, I guess. And I love it. Like, there's things that don't make sense and there's things that are just ridiculously absurd, but I can't help but recognize that when I'm done this book, I'm laughing, I'm smiling. I had a really enjoyable time reading this book, both the first time and this time. And I think if you go into it with that attitude and, don't expect something that it's not, I think you'll appreciate it much more than if you go into it, not with an open mind. And I'm not saying that everyone's going to like this. I totally get that there's a huge subset of people that will just think this is totally stupid. And I get that. I totally understand that. But I have to give this one 5 out of 5 Paramount Pictures stars ringing a mountain while we're playing golf with Klingons.
Nice.
Because I love it.
Well, I think this is one of the first times that you and I are total opposite ends of our opinion of a book. Usually we're pretty much in line. But again, I think it's just, maybe just a different sense of humor or something that works for some people that doesn't work for others. It's like when I've done improv, there's, scenes that some people really say they love and others like, oh, I didn't think that was funny at all. It's like everybody's got their own like sense of humor to it. But yeah, I'm glad that we read it. It was fun.
Yeah, me too. This is one that I've been wanting to cover for a while, and it's one that, again, like I said, I totally get people will have very different opinions on, and I can't fault anybody for that opinion. And I hope you don't fault me for just unabashedly loving this, even though I can recognize there's a lot of things that are totally ridiculous. But
I would never feel bad about anybody loving a Star Trek novel. I don't care what the novel is.
Here.
So,
and I would never begrudge anybody their personal opinion about something.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And one thing,
thing
thing about this novel is we had the character of Poke that we mentioned that quoted Orson Welles and stuff, and he's all into this early 20th century movies and culture and stuff, which is a little odd for a Klingon. But at the same time, there were so many references to old movies and lines and things like that I was actually craving, and they were in an old movie theater too on this planet. I was actually craving the need of going to watch an old movie. Like I wanted to go watch like, oh, that's an old classic. Oh, I kind of feel like watching that now. Like the book was making me want to do that.
Yeah, and in an old theater with like, this kind of chairs that squeak when you pull them down a little bit because it's so old. But, it's got those big velvet curtains and those velvet ropes and the old popcorn machine. And
you know what, Dan?
Yeah, I love that.
I've been saying this since I was a teenager. My dream thing to do when I retire is to buy an old theater, refurbish it, and show old movies in it.
Oh man, that would be awesome. I would get in on that
right,
with
let's
you.
Do it.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's been fun talking about really old vintage movie theaters today, but it's not the only thing we've been discussing on the network. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on Trek FM.
Previously on Trek.fm. To the journey!
You really did reorient my thinking about the mess hall. Now I need to rewatch every scene with the mess hall and try to visualize Neelix's kitchen as the captain's dining room. I just assumed that when she said, this used to be my private dining room, that she meant the whole mess hall, like the entire room that they're in.
That would be gigantic.
How have I watched Voyager for what is now 23 years and not realized this?
The 602 Club.
He can be soft and caring and then suddenly be funny and sarcastic, but he's, it's sort of that scene where he's with his therapist in the car and she's supposed to be evaluating him and he's saying, she goes, I love this just as much as the next girl, and then she said something like, who's that girl? Oh, the next girl.
The next girl.
The one who clearly is better than you.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Admiral Cornwall, let's discuss this more and, take off your comm badge. Like, who would do that to an admiral? And so it's like, how did he have that, knowledge?
Warp 5.
Good thing they had those peaches at the start of the episode. Good thing he convinced her to bite it. The moral of the story is always eat your peaches.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Chekhov's gun. Telling you.
Chekhov's peach.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. Where did you find this podcast? Well, you'll find a lot more Trek FM podcasts right there.
And if you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in the Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they become published. And please leave us a star rating and written review, which we got one recently, which we're going to read here shortly. And if you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. And you can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and most third-party apps. And you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab that RSS link.
And if you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/trekfm to get all of the details. Perks can include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, and those are all available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce and distribute these shows each month, and we really appreciate any support you can give. We really hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all of the details at patreon.com/trekfm. So we do have an iTunes review by Chris Hill, and this was a 5-star review, so thank you for that, first of all. And Chris writes, I love your takes on the books. The novels have been with me for most of my life. I would read the books while I was in transit from the States to my deployments. The most recent episode, Hogwarts Academy, helped me remember one such book. I thoroughly enjoyed that book and wished Bill and the Reeves-Stevens were able to continue the stories. I also enjoy the news and comic reviews. Well, thank you so much for that, Chris. That was, of course, our review of Collision Course you're talking about.
Episode
there.
227.
And yeah, and that one was a lot of fun. Yeah, the Shatnerverse novels. I never thought I'd say this, but after that, I kind of almost wish that we got more of those myself. So yeah, not an opinion I ever thought I'd have, but
Yeah. But there's I think we mentioned on that show too, there's other Academy books, not by Shatner, but maybe we'll venture into those other books someday.
Yeah, for sure.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways you can do that, and the best place to join that larger conversation is in the Babel Conference. It's our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. And if you'd like to send us an email, well, you can do that by using the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Literary Treks, and that will come right to us. And you can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM.
And of course, Literary Treks, we're talking about books. So we have a Goodreads group where we have bookshelves with all of our previously covered books, as well as the currently reading section, so you know what's coming up for future shows. And of course, there are great conversations happening about all of the books and comics. Just search for Literary Treks on Goodreads and click Join Group, and we'll let you right in. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank Norman C. Lau, Ken Tripp, Greg Rosier, Brandon Shemutala, Justin Ozer, and Jeffrey Harlan for their support of the Trek FM network, and especially for being associate producers for Literary Treks as well. Thank you guys. We really appreciate it. Now, Bruce, when you're not brandishing a golf club facing incoming fire alongside your Klingon opponent, where can we find you?
Aye, lad, you can find me by there you go, Klingon. You can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex, and you can find me on the Star Wars Report podcast, and you can find that anywhere you get your podcasts, or go to StarWarsReport.com, and of course, Solo. That's the big talk right now, so check us out there. And of course, you can always find me in the Babel Conference on Facebook. And Dan, when you're not eating your orange grits and drinking electric blue orange juice, where can people find you?
Well, I certainly am not worried about the blue orange juice. I think that's just normal. I'll just drink that. That's fine. But yeah, if I don't end up in the hospital, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Kertrats. That's Kertrats. You can find me on Facebook.com/Kertrats Productions and on YouTube.com/Kertrats Productions, where I make videos about Star Trek mostly, because what else is there in the world really to talk about than Star Trek? I mean, it's great, ain't it?
That's all we talk about
Anyway.
on here. That and the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I gotta tune into your Brady Bunch.
Well, I haven't
podcast
started it
sometime.
yet. And just so you know, we have all the seasons, all 5 seasons on DVD, and my daughters actually wanted to watch them all with me, and they did. So now they're up to speed.
Oh, that's awesome. They can be your co-hosts. I
Yes,
love it.
and anybody who's watched Brady Bunch, you know there's an episode where Greg tells Marcia the best way to break up with a guy is just to say something subtly came up when he asked you out on a date. My daughter actually used that on a guy, and it worked.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, on that note, thank you all, everyone, for listening. And until next time,
live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.